Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, was temporarily Prime Minister when the reform took place, and he looked tentatively into the way in which the unfortunate members of society are treated. Now, back in the day, Prime Ministers were king to some degree, and they sat as a bridge between the legislative and the monarchical. Today, we have no such thing. The Pledge of Allegiance to the King was made by the PM, is now made into a wonderful worshipful religion of DEI through a dead Priministarial office. Now, the monarchy no longer has purpose, we might say. Today, the monarchy has become so woke as to shift the entire meaning of the phrase. King Charles has so little self-respect that he has officially declared his wayward son, Prince Harry, as having a sort of a half-in, half-out relationship with the crown. It was in 1832, and the noise from the protestations outside the magnificent palace of 10 Downing Street swamped his ears. The National Political Union had so much to say about the dissolution of rotten boroughs that it was overwhelming. Now, certainly, Lord Charles Grey couldn't cope with the mess to such an extent that the Duke of Wellington took over from him.
And the loser gets erased.
A total failure as far as opposition was concerned. Now, by a royal decree, his efforts to subjugate the opponents of parliamentary reform were causing so much rioting of the Chartist revolution that Sir Charles Grey's time in office was now at a close. And it is indicative of such movements as Chartism that the divide between monarchy and the state has really reached breaking point in the 21st century.
Sir, if this bill goes through, you won't have any socks. They're going to bankrupt you.
An instrumental example of this is the devastation of charity shops. Now, Cecil Jackson Cole was fundamental in setting up some of the first charity shops that focused on the poor and needy. Oxfam was one of his greatest achievements. Since the House of Commons charity bill that went through on the 13th of July 2006, and the Health and Safety Programme of 2007 have become more increasingly difficult. Heartless corporations and groping institutional departments sweep the understanding nature of our compassion like great dustbins, and we only have to look at the recent mind-numbing, sumptuously absurd behaviour of the charity Green Crescent Bangladesh UK. My intent here is not necessarily to disparage those charity organisations which have effect upon our society. However, such organisations are being used nowadays to infiltrate funding terrorist activity to see the corruption oozing from such institutions.
I'd rather have a runny nose than a runny brain.
Though, most importantly, we have to ask, who takes advantage of these services? Who takes advantage of the charity bill? We have charity going on all over the place, but it doesn't stop there. Swathes of visitors come over to our shores every day using the charity bill, causing institutions. They're ruining institutions created by Cecil. The Association of Charities propagates this legislation. The Equality Act, in fact, condones giving out. It's out-giving, almost. The dissolution of rotten boroughs achieved nothing today.
Give the like of Baldrick the vote, and we'll be back to cavorting druids, death by stoning, and dung for dinner.
At all. Those Chartists were flogging a dead horse. Now, even the Third Reform Act did absolutely nothing. A last stand against the foresight that has come to pass today. How far have we actually come since the Third Reform Act was instituted by royal decree in 1832? Workhouses continued to flourish at the time, and the efforts of the reinstituted Prime Minister, Lord Grey, were in comparative vain.
Excellent! Sensible policies for a happier Britain.
As a consequence, his reputation took a vital hit when Wellington was called back again to Parliament after his valour in France some years earlier. As far as the poor of the age were concerned, little has still changed. They still toiled in the fields and brickyards, their conditions were little amended. Most of the changes instituted focused on the wealthy middle classes, which were now divided between the working classes ever more than before. Certainly, any such resolution is comparable to the days when the Whigs stood up for the common man through conservatism. It's a shame they all turned to exclusionism in the modern age through liberal indoctrination. Jewish emancipation was now on the rise in the 1800s, and the Third Reform instituted the first protestations towards the women's right to vote. The Chartist movement was on the rise, and it led to the instigation of the poor being looked at with greater urgency.
Oh my God, and here he is!
Ultimately, the Great Reform Act was the first port of call in a rise of modern democracy, which is now absurdly called populism. Charity shops were not set up in their current form until the late 1940s, and no one batted an eyelid at the way in which the poorhouses were contemptuously taking advantage of the Equality Act itself, which is set up on the lines of the Marxist system of value regarding the reserve force of labour.
Mrs. Cratchit, you have the body of a weak woman, but the mind of a criminal genius.
Ultimately, institutionalising those with disabilities who could not live up to their potential instead of being internally subjugated by a system that doesn't really want them, whilst religiously raising the status of culturally incompatible invaders to the position of economic gods. It's incredible. However, despite the numerous legislation winding themselves around contemporary charities like unstoppable growth inhibitors, high street outlets and charitable institutions seem to be thriving. Now, for instance, governmental officials apparently are failing to stop the bulging and swelling of charity shops taking over the centre of Welshpool. It was claimed even today the irate members of the local council are crying that high streets all over the country are being overwhelmed with charity shops taking advantage of the rate of relief, pushing away local traders. Apparently, charity shops get 80% rate relief. So when it comes to paying the rent, they can't afford to pay anymore.
I'm rotten, stinking, stony, stinking broke.
It's unfortunate. Also, the public awareness of the sort of wealth that flows in and out of philanthropic emporiums is also growing. Now, this is, of course, the instance that the quality control must have their say. They must. I mean, patriarchal charity shops today can be perceived as a shattering micro-empire within the shattered empire of our nation. If the governing body of the Charity Commission were a leadership party, there were no voters at all. Excepting the small majority clinging to the old order of entailed within a struggling sweater. As such, we find that there is not to the town shops that we find ourselves this type of understanding and the communal spirit, but the smaller shops beyond. Charity shops in village environments tend to receive higher daily dividends than those in town because their prices tend to be substantially lower, of course, therefore drawing more custom. Perhaps on that basis we should all be looking for quality in our browsing and purchasing and not inequality. Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, fought in vain as an effort made by a conservative soldier. Reform and protestation on a social scale are, and continue to be, ugly strains resulting in corruption and negligence of a liberal landscape, sweeping under the table those that don't want to see. Segregation and fragmentation on an unprecedented scale.
Well, I wouldn't be too sure about that.
The only way we can pick up the pieces of Arthur's effort is to forge a new, solidified solidarity. Through reform is to break through the religious fervour we have created for ourselves within DEI. the Equal Rights Act. Solidarity existence grinds to a halt.
Well, all I can say, Borwick, is this. It's the last time I dabble in politics.
Give us a good clicking.
Shakanaka.